thank you everybody for being here. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be personally involved as curator for this particular exhibition. I was really excited, in fact, when I had heard earlier this year that the Magna Carta might be coming. And of course now it's actually coming. So this is really quite a wonderful experience for me. Now, as the High Commissioner has just pointed out, the Magna Carta is 800 years old this year. And really, if one wants to look into the real history and context of the Magna Carta, it is remarkable in the sense that if you read its terms, it should never have survived 800 years. The document could have survived, but the ideas and the rules would not technically have survived. This is a document which King John was forced to seal. A lot of people have this idea that he signed the Magna Carta, including the Royal Mint. They came up with a £2 coin, which unfortunately had him holding the Magna Carta in one hand and a quill in the other hand. But actually he should have been holding something that would have affixed a seal. So if you see that 1250 version, they've actually affixed a seal to it. Actually, there's only one with a real seal on it, and it's actually rather mutilated because it got caught in the fire. So you wouldn't really be able to see King John's seal as it were. So imagine the days before email, before photocopies and so on. King John was there, forced by the barons to concede a number of things. There are 61 provisions in the original Magna Carta of 1215, and of which really only 3.5 maybe of these provisions are really important to us today. They are, as the American Chief Justice John Robert calls, kernels of transcendent value, right? Where they actually transcend everything else. And these are the provisions relating to equality, to fair trial, and so on, that you find in the Magna Carta, which forms the basis of modern democracy, representation, rule of law, where the king is actually subjected to the law. So in that sense, the Magna Carta has achieved an iconic status beyond what it really was intended to be. This was a desperate document of King John. He needed to stay alive, he needed to prevent the barons from closing in on him, and he unwillingly signed, or rather sealed, this document. And subsequently, within 3 months, tried to tear it up. He got the Pope to try and annul it. The Pope did. The Pope annulled the document, right? And one was hoping that something else would happen, and we were wondering what John would be doing next, but unfortunately he died the next year, or rather fortunately for the subjects, because he died the next year. Some people suspect he was poisoned, but he died of dysentery. And his infant son, Henry III, in order to secure his own position, on the advice of the nobles, reissued a second Magna Carta, 1216. Subsequently, in 1217, they reaffirmed the charter one more time, right? So that's why if you're wondering what is the Magna Carta, there was never a Magna Carta. There was a charter. 1215 was the original charter. Subsequently, of course, they reissued it. And of course, when they did this, this was the days before photocopier. So the scribes had to inscribe each of these by hand, and on parchment that was prepared. And that's why some of them appear in a landscape fashion, some of them are in portrait fashion, and so on. And so you couldn't get it very quickly. So on the day that John sealed the Magna Carta at Runnymede, they maybe got a couple of copies. How many copies were there of the 1215 version? Well, historians have debated this for a long time. Many of them suspected that he would have sent copies to all the counties, plus the Cinque Ports, plus London, which would have made up maybe 40 copies. That was the sort of the old thinking. But the latest thinking among historians is that there were a lot less than that. They did find some documentation that had sort of a distribution list, and there were only 13 that were made in 1215. Instead of sending them to the counties where the sheriffs would have gotten their hands on it, they sent them to all the dioceses with bishops. So if you add that all up together in 1215, there were only 13 of them. Right? So that's really remarkable, that out of the 13 copies of the 1215 edition 4 survive till today. We do not know how many copies of the 1216 version exist. Historians are still tracking that. There's a wonderful Magna Carta website where, because it's the 800th anniversary, everybody's abuzz trying to dig up more and more stuff about it. But we do know that for 1217, there are also only 4 copies, and Hereford is probably the best preserved of that lot. This has never traveled. Magna Carta has gone on tour before. The 1215 version, held now by Lincoln Castle, used to be at Lincoln Cathedral, now at Lincoln Castle, did a tour, went to the United States, exhibition at the Library of Congress in 1939, and then got stuck there because of the war. And in fact, Winston Churchill, in wishing to acknowledge with gratitude the help that America gave them in coming into the Second World War, actually offered the Lincoln Cathedral version to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President, in gratitude. Now, of course, the question then was, Lincoln, of course, was absolutely furious. What they're going to do if their precious Magna Carta was going to go missing? And then, of course, Churchill, being very clever, said, "Oh yeah, but we have 2 copies in the British Library. We'll give one of those to Lincoln, so FDR can keep the Americans can keep the Lincoln copy." That never happened. The Americans, after the war, returned the Lincoln copy of the Magna Carta to the British. And so that was the only copy of the Magna Carta that's really ever traveled. And that traveled again last year, this year, back to the United States. I think you could trust the Americans not to want to keep it, so they give it back. The Hereford copy has never gone on a tour, and this is really quite wonderful. It's actually touring 7 countries, including Singapore. We are now sort of the third to last leg of the tour. After Singapore, it will go to Malta in time for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and then to Portugal, and then back to Hereford. So, this is really quite a treat. We hope this will continue to generate discussion about the values which the Magna Carta embody, for another 800 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I should say that it's with the support of British Airways that this global tour is taking place, and specifically here in Singapore, it's the world's leading international law firm, Clifford Chance, which is providing much of the support that's enabling us to put on the exhibition and the display at the Supreme Court. So we're very grateful to them as well.
Yeah, sorry, Paul, there's one more point which I forgot to add. While everybody's attention will be focused on this large document, the Magna Carta, there are 4 copies of the 1217 version. There are 4 copies of the 1215 version. There is just one of King John's writ. This was addressed actually to the sheriffs rather than to the bishops. You see, nobody trusted the sheriffs. The barons didn't trust the sheriffs. That's why they never gave it to the sheriffs. They gave it to the bishops. And this was really an injunction to all the sheriffs to make sure that the terms of the Magna Carta are obeyed. So those would have been maybe 40 copies in 1215, and there's just one surviving one. So if you ask me what is the rarest thing that the public will get to see, it's really King John's writ, King John's letter, and that has never traveled out of England.